Most people think self-sabotage is just bad luck, lack of willpower, or some mysterious part of their personality they can't control. But in reality, self-sabotage is a system, one that works for you in ways you rarely admit. In today's episode, I'm going to break down why you keep getting in your own way, what you're really protecting when you sabotage yourself, and what it actually takes to break the cycle for good. So, if you've ever watched yourself ruin your own chances and wondered, why do I keep doing this? This is the episode for you. Part number one, why self-sabotage isn't really an accident. When people talk about self-sabotage, they usually describe it like some mysterious force that sneaks up on them. You'll hear phrases like, I don't know what happened, or I just couldn't help myself. It sounds as if sabotage is something that happens to you, almost by accident, as if you had no part in it. But if you pay close attention to your own behavior and you track the steps leading up to a decision that ruins your progress, you'll see that self-sabotage is never an accident. It's a process that you participate in every single time. Think about a simple example. Imagine someone who is trying to lose weight and they've been doing well for a few weeks. One night, they find themselves eating half a cake at midnight. The next morning, they feel regret and confusion. They might even say, it just happened. I don't know why. But if you actually rewind the tape, you'll find dozens of small, active decisions that led to that moment. They walked into the kitchen, they opened the fridge, they looked at the cake and thought about it. Maybe they told themselves, just one bite won't matter. Even the choice to keep cake in the house was part of the setup. None of this was random. It was a series of micro decisions, often justified in the moment, but always stacking up to a predictable result. This is true for every kind of self-sabotage. Whether it's procrastinating on an important project, picking a fight with your partner before an anniversary, or ghosting on a job interview, there is always a chain of participation. At every step, you could have chosen differently, yet you didn't. The process might feel automatic because it's so familiar, but it only works if you keep playing your part in it. What people often overlook is the amount of agency they actually have in these moments. When you say, I can't help myself, what you're really describing is a pattern you've repeated so many times that it feels like second nature. But if you slow down and look at each decision point, you'll see where your choices come into play. For example, the student who keeps pulling all-nighters and missing deadlines isn't just unlucky. They're making dozens of active choices. For example, waiting until the last minute to start, checking their phone instead of working, telling themselves they work better under pressure, and so on. Each of these is a decision, and together they add up to a self-inflicted failure. And this way of looking at self-sabotage can be uncomfortable because it removes the story that you're simply a victim of your own impulses. It puts the spotlight on your own agency, which means you have to confront the real reasons you keep getting in your own way. It's about getting honest about how much control you actually have over your own actions, even when it doesn't feel like it. So, once you start seeing sabotage as something you're actively involved in, rather than something that just happens, you gain leverage over the process. Instead of waiting for the next accident, you can start to notice the early warning signs, the small, almost invisible moments where you start steering off track. This is the first real step in breaking the cycle. If you can recognize that self-sabotage is not random, you can begin to interrupt it. And that sets the stage for understanding why you do it at all, which is where we need to go in the next part. Part number two, the hidden payoff and why you secretly want to fail. Once you accept that self-sabotage is not an accident, it raises a tougher question. Why would anyone deliberately get in their own way? On the surface, this makes no sense. If you want to lose weight, why would you binge at midnight? If you want a promotion, why would you keep missing deadlines? The answer is that beneath the surface, self-sabotage always comes with a payoff. And that payoff is rarely obvious. In fact, it usually operates outside of conscious awareness. But it's always there, and it explains why these patterns keep repeating, even when they cause pain and regret. To understand this, you need to look at the concept of secondary gain. In psychology, a secondary gain is a hidden benefit that you get from a negative behavior or outcome. It's what makes the sabotage worth it on some level, even if you claim to hate the result. For example, failing at a goal gives you a perfect excuse to avoid the risks that come with success. If you never finish your book, you never have to face critics. If you never ask for a raise, you never risk being told you're not valuable enough. The payoff is that you stay safe from disappointment, embarrassment, or the anxiety that comes with stepping into new territory. Let's make this concrete. Imagine someone who says they want to find a healthy relationship, but every time they meet someone promising, they start arguments over trivial issues. At first, this just looks like bad luck or poor self-control. But if you look closer, you'll see a familiar story. By sabotaging the connection, they get to avoid the fear of real intimacy. Staying single becomes less scary than risking the pain of being truly seen and possibly rejected. So, the hidden payoff is emotional safety, even if it comes at the price of loneliness. This applies to career sabotage as well. Take someone who keeps skipping job interviews or missing deadlines on important projects. The conscious story they tell themselves is that they want to move forward, but the pattern keeps repeating. But when you dig deeper, you'll usually find a payoff like this. By not trying, they can always tell themselves, I could have succeeded if I really tried. It protects their self-image, allowing them to hold on to the idea that they are capable, even if they never prove it. And so, the pain of failure is replaced by the comfort of potential. There are many other forms of secondary gain, but most of them come down to avoiding some kind of threat, whether it's emotional pain, the loss of a comforting narrative, or the anxiety of change. And self-sabotage is very efficient at protecting you from these threats, but it always comes at a cost. The more you use sabotage to avoid risk, the more it becomes a habit, and the less you're able to move toward what you say you want. Understanding this hidden payoff doesn't mean you're choosing to lose in some dramatic way. It simply means you're protecting yourself from something that feels even more threatening than failure. Most people never look at their patterns this closely. They only see the regret after the fact, and they miss the comfort that comes with staying right where they are. But if you can start to identify the hidden rewards that sabotage brings you, you can start to see your behavior for what it really is, a trade-off and not a mistake. So, understanding this lays the groundwork for the next part, which is understanding how your identity gets wrapped up in these sabotage patterns, often without you even knowing it. Part number 3, using self-sabotage as identity maintenance. If you take a step back and look at your patterns of self-sabotage, you'll often notice something deeper than just avoiding discomfort. In most cases, sabotage is tied to the need to maintain a familiar sense of who you are. This is where things get more complex, because the part of you that wants to change is often in conflict with the part of you that wants to stay exactly the same. This conflict plays out unconsciously, but it explains why self-sabotage feels so stubborn and why insight alone rarely breaks this cycle. At its core, your identity is just the story you tell yourself about who you are, what you're good at, what you can expect from life, and how other people see you. Over time, you build this story from your experiences, your family, your successes, and failures. And even your weaknesses become a part of it. And as strange as it sounds, you can get attached to these weaknesses because they give you a stable sense of self, even if that self isn't especially happy or successful. Take someone who sees themselves as an underachiever. They may say they want to break out of that role, but actually succeeding would threaten the very foundation of their identity. For example, if you've always told yourself, I'm the kind of person who never finishes anything, what happens if you do finish something? Suddenly, you're confronted with a new reality, and that can be frightening in its own way. The sabotage, then, isn't just about fear of failure, but fear of losing the story that's been holding you together. You see this in people who identify as the black sheep of the family, or the one who always messes up. For them, improvement or change doesn't just require new habits. It requires rewriting the script they've lived by for years. And that's a heavy psychological burden. And so, the familiar misery of self-sabotage starts to feel safer than the anxiety of being someone new. So even when opportunities come up, there's a strong pull to recreate old problems, just to prove that your identity still fits. The same thing happens in relationships. If you're used to being rejected or overlooked, getting genuine attention or affection can feel threatening because it clashes with your internal narrative. You might unconsciously pick fights, withdraw, or test your partner's patience, not because you want to be alone, but because that's what your story expects. So maintaining that identity, even when it's painful, feels like a kind of safety. This is why so many people who try to change their lives find themselves pulled back into old patterns as soon as things start to improve. The better things get, the more uncomfortable and unfamiliar it feels. There's always that inner questioning like, who am I if I'm not struggling? Who am I if I actually get what I want? Self-sabotage steps in as a way to answer those questions by restoring the balance of your old identity. Understanding this isn't about blaming yourself for having the wrong story. It's about recognizing how much power your self-image holds over your behavior. If you only focus on what you want to achieve, but ignore the identity you're protecting, your efforts to change will always run into resistance. The real work is to become aware of the identity you're trying to maintain and to see that you're not obligated to keep living out that old script. In the next part, I'm going to explain exactly how the sabotage process plays out in real time and how you can start to catch yourself in the act before the cycle repeats itself again. Part number 4, the mechanics, how sabotage actually happens step by step. Now that you understand self-sabotage as a process you participate in, one that protects your comfort and your identity, the next question is what this looks like, step by step, in the moments when it actually unfolds. Most people imagine sabotage as a single dramatic mistake, but the reality is much more methodical. It's a chain of ordinary moments, each one easy to overlook, but together they create a reliable pathway to the outcome you secretly expect. It usually starts with a trigger, an opportunity, a challenge, or a moment of progress. For some, this might be a positive response from someone you like, or even a stretch of days where you stick to your goals. At first, this trigger can feel good, proof that change is possible, that things might go your way. But quickly, that feeling is replaced by discomfort, anxiety, or even a sense of being out of place. The positive trigger brings you face to face with the threat of becoming someone different. And this is when the sabotage sequence begins. The next phase is internal dialogue. This is where rationalizations start to creep in, and you start to convince yourself why the positive trigger isn't a good idea after all. This is the way your mind creates permission to retreat back into old habits. This inner script isn't random. It's rehearsed, familiar, and often feels completely convincing in the moment. Once the rationalization is in place, you move to the behavioral stage. This is where action or inaction starts to steer you off course. Maybe you delay the important phone call. Maybe you accidentally forget to prepare for the meeting. Or you pick an argument that spirals out of control, conveniently derailing the positive momentum you'd started to build. These aren't acts of sabotage with a capital S. They're small, everyday choices that add up, each one nudging you back toward the safety of your old story. And after the behavior comes the justification phase. When things predictably go wrong, when the deadline is missed, or the relationship hits the rocks, you explain it to yourself and others in ways that preserve your identity. For example, you tell yourself, "It just wasn't meant to be. I was too busy. I always get unlucky." This stage is important because it closes the loop. It reinforces your belief in the old narrative and makes it even easier to repeat the cycle next time. What makes this process so powerful is how automatic it feels. Each stage, trigger, dialogue, behavior, justification, flows into the next without much conscious effort. The sabotage doesn't feel like sabotage. It feels like the natural way things happen. That's why so many people miss the pattern, even after years of repeating it. To see this in your own life, you have to slow things down. Notice when you get the urge to back out of something important, or when you find yourself telling old stories about why you can't change. Pay attention to the excuses that come up and the tiny behaviors that add up to missed opportunities. The more specific you get, the easier it becomes to recognize the process as it unfolds, not just in hindsight, but in real time. This level of awareness is necessary, but it's not the same as breaking the pattern. Knowing how sabotage works doesn't automatically stop it. Many people become experts at analyzing their behavior, but they still get caught in the same traps. So the question becomes, why isn't insight enough, and what actually moves you forward, instead of keeping you stuck in analysis? That's what I'm going to explain in the next part. Part number 5, why insight alone isn't enough. By now, you might be thinking that understanding self-sabotage is half the battle. Maybe you've recognized your patterns, you know when you're making excuses, and you've spotted the ways you protect your old identity. But if you've ever tried to change these habits, you know that insight on its own rarely gets you across the finish line. The truth is, you can be completely aware of what you're doing and still watch yourself repeat the same mistakes. The gap between knowing and doing is where most people get stuck. The problem is that self-sabotage isn't powered by ignorance. It's powered by avoidance. Even when you understand every step of the process, every rationalization, every trade-off, every hidden fear, the emotional discomfort that comes with real change doesn't go away just because you can see it. Most people wait for insight to make the discomfort disappear. They hope that by understanding their triggers or tracing their history, the urge to sabotage will simply vanish. But it never does, because sabotage is a strategy for emotional relief and not a misunderstanding that needs to be cleared up. Consider someone who always talks themselves out of applying for better jobs. They know exactly why they procrastinate. They can see the internal script, like telling themselves, "I'm not qualified, it won't make a difference," or "I can always try next year." But when the moment comes to act, the same anxiety about rejection or change shows up. Insight gives them a front row seat to their own self-sabotage, but it doesn't push them out of their seat. Real change happens when you're willing to act before you feel ready, when you do the thing that makes you anxious or uncertain without waiting for your emotions to line up first. This is uncomfortable by design. It's the opposite of sabotage because it means risking disappointment, embarrassment, or loss of the identity you've built around your old patterns. There's no guarantee of relief or reassurance at the start. In fact, the discomfort will probably get stronger as you break out of old cycles. The people who actually overcome self-sabotage are not the ones with the most insight. They're the ones who tolerate the feeling of being exposed, awkward, or out of place. They move forward even when their mind is screaming for safety. They understand that anxiety, doubt, and even small setbacks are just part of the process of building a new pattern. Instead of looking for a moment when everything feels right, they accept that there will never be a perfect time to act. It's easy to collect self-knowledge and turn it into a kind of hobby, reading, analyzing, reflecting, and talking about your patterns without ever interrupting them. But this only reinforces the identity you already have, someone who understands themselves but can't change. The only way to change the story is to act differently, again and again, until the new pattern starts to feel more natural than the old one. The bottom line is that insight is useful, but it's not a cure. It's a map, not the journey itself. The only thing that changes behavior is behavior. If you can accept the discomfort that comes with acting before you feel ready, you stop looking for permission to change, and you actually start moving. This is the moment when sabotage loses its grip and your life begins to move in a new direction. That's the end of this episode. Here's what you need to remember. Self-sabotage isn't random. It's a system you participate in, and the only way out is to act, even when it's uncomfortable. Let me know what you think, or if this makes sense to you guys. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.